My name is Mark, and my whole life has been turned upside down in the last month. I had a stable job at a construction company for almost 10 years. The company was small, but we had regular clients and large projects. I was always sure that my job provided my wife and me with everything we needed for a comfortable life. We had a nice house, cars, could afford to go on vacation, and I always felt confident about the future. But one day everything changed. The news that the company was experiencing financial difficulties came out of the blue. My boss gathered everyone in a small room and announced with a heavy heart, "We cannot continue at this pace any longer. The finances are at zero. We have to stop our activities." I remember sitting there, stunned, trying to realize what this meant for me. My job had always been the main source of income for our family. My wife, Emily, worked as a teacher at a local school, but her salary was far from what my job brought in. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that I would find a new job, but deep inside I was already gnawing at a sense of uncertainty and fear. From the moment I lost my job, Emily started to change. At first, it was unnoticeable. She became more withdrawn, asked me less questions about my day, and we spent less time together. I thought it was because of the stress of work, as she was busy preparing for new curriculum and lessons. But over time, these changes became more and more obvious. Every evening when she came home from work, I felt that she was getting further away from me. She no longer came home with a smile like she used to. Her face looked tired, and there was more silence than conversation in our house. We rarely spent time together watching TV or discussing future plans. She didn't seem to want to be around me anymore. The worst part was that I felt useless. After losing my job, I stayed at home, looking for new jobs and waiting for something to change. But nothing changed. I noticed that Emily was coming home late from work more and more often, and even when I asked her questions about her day, she was reluctant to answer, as if she was hiding something. I could see the alienation in her eyes, and it was getting stronger and stronger. It had been a month since I lost my job. Every day I tried to find new vacancies, sent my resume, but there were no results. And the situation at home was not improving. I began to think that I had lost not only my job, but also my wife. My life continued to slide downhill, and I felt that the situation was only getting worse. My wife had been distant for a month, and now I noticed not only emotional coldness, but also physical distance. Emily rarely initiated any conversations, and when I tried to find out something about her day, she answered briefly and indifferently. We used to always discuss her work and laugh at her school pranks, but now the conversations were reduced to dry facts. "Everything is fine. The kids were noisy today," and so on. One evening, when I noticed that she came home at 10 o'clock, not 7 as usual, I was alarmed. I was sitting in the kitchen, looking at job postings, waiting for her, but when she came in, I immediately sensed something was wrong. Her phone was off, which was completely unusual for her. "Why are you so late?" I asked, trying to sound calm, even though a storm of suspicion was already building inside me. "I had a lot of work to do. You know how it is," she replied, not looking at me. Her eyes were focused on the bag she was unpacking, as if to avoid my gaze. "But you said that classes ended at 5. What were you doing until 10? I tried to control myself, but the tension in my voice was obvious. She hesitated a bit, then answered, "We had a meeting with my parents. We had to discuss plans for the semester." These words did not give me any relief. I could see that she was hiding something. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I felt like something was breaking between us, and I didn't know how to stop it. The week passed in the same rhythm. Emily came home later, and I felt more and more like an outsider in our own home. My thoughts were constantly revolving around what was happening. Every time she was around, I tried to gather the strength to start a serious conversation, but I couldn't. I was overcome with fear. What if I'm really winding myself up? What if I ruin everything by accusing her without any reason? But one day my fear turned into determination. I could no longer live in the shadow of my suspicions and doubts. I decided that I had to find out the truth, whatever it was. It was a Friday night. I knew that Emily was supposed to have a regular workday and would be home around 6 in the evening. But when I didn't see her at 6, I decided to act. I took a bouquet of flowers. I wanted to surprise her and stopped by the school to pick her up from work. Maybe I just misunderstood her. Maybe she was really tired and I just didn't notice it. I was determined to set things right. When I arrived at the school, it was already 7 o'clock. I stopped at the entrance and tried to call Emily to let her know I was waiting for her. But her phone was off. This wasn't the first time this had happened, but now it seemed even more suspicious. My heart beat faster and I decided to go inside. The school was already almost empty. The evening light barely made its way through the windows, creating a strange atmosphere. I knew where her classroom was and confidently headed there, carrying the flowers. Every step seemed like an eternity. As I got closer, my anxiety only grew. As I approached the door of her office, I was overcome with an inexplicable feeling. The school was quiet, but this silence was strange, as if something was about to happen. And then I heard it. Sounds were coming from the office. At first, I couldn't understand what it was, but after a few seconds it became clear to me it was the sound of someone making love. I was frozen in place. My legs couldn't move, my heart was beating frantically, and my eyes were flashing dark. This can't be true, I thought, but the reality hit me right in the face. I was standing in front of the office door, and only the same thoughts were running through my head. It can't be true. No, it's not her. But the sounds coming from behind the door left me no other choice. I could no longer run away from what I was about to see. My hands nervously clutched the bouquet, and everything inside was boiling with rage and fear. Seconds seemed like an eternity. I took a step forward, feeling a chill run through my body. I had to know the truth, even if it would destroy me. Inside the office, someone was breathing loudly, the rhythm of the sounds clear and undeniable. I could no longer ignore it. I did not knock on the door. The rage overcame me completely, and I kicked the door in with a strong blow. The door cracked open, and what I saw made my world stop. Emily was lying on the table, completely naked, and next to her was George, the father of one of her students, an electrician who worked at the school. When they finally realized my presence, their faces were contorted with shock. "What the hell is going on here?" I shouted, unable to contain my anger. George jumped up from his seat and began to hastily dress. His eyes darted frantically in different directions, not daring to look me in the face. Emily was frozen, unable to say a word, her face covered with red spots of shame. "Mark, it's not what you think," she tried to say, but her voice sounded weak and hopeless. I threw the flowers to the floor, their petals scattering under my feet. My heart was pounding madly, my hands were trembling with anger. I could no longer hear anything but the pulsating sound in my ears. All I could see was Emily's face, the woman I loved and trusted, and the man she was cheating on me with right there at the school where she worked. "How could you?" I whispered, looking at her with more despair than I had ever felt before. She tried to explain something, her lips trembling, but I couldn't listen anymore. There was only one thing in my mind they had to answer for this. My body moved automatically. I rushed to George, who was still trying to put on his pants. My fists hit him so fast that he didn't even have time to defend himself. One punch, another, everything happened like in slow motion. The rage swept over me completely, and I couldn't contain it. I didn't think anymore, I just acted. "Mark, stop! Mark, stop!" Emily shouted, but her voice sounded far away, like she was behind a wall. When George fell to the floor, I stopped for a moment. Looking at him, I felt my anger gradually give way to devastation. He lay hunched over, clutching his face helplessly, and I stood over him, silently watching what he had done. How could this have happened? How could our lives have turned into such a terrible chaos? Everything was mixed up in my head: love, pain, betrayal, and horror at what I had done. You ruined us, I whispered again, looking at Emily. Her eyes were full of tears, but it was too late. Something in me was broken forever. After I let go of George, standing in the midst of scattered clothes and broken dreams, the room was filled with a heavy silence. Emily stared at me with wide eyes, unable to say anything. Her tears were streaming down her face, but I could no longer feel anything but devastation for her. My rage faded away, and in its place came a terrible feeling of emptiness. "Why did you do this?" I asked quietly, not looking up at her. She was silent for a few seconds and then sighed, trying to find the right words. "Mark, I don't know how it happened. We grew apart. I didn't feel that you loved me anymore." Her voice trembled as her hands covered her face. "It wasn't like that. It wasn't what I planned. I just—" "You didn't feel it?" I interrupted, looking up at her. "You decided to solve it by having sex with George at school? Is that your answer to our problems?" She lowered her head, not knowing how to answer. I could tell she was ashamed, but it didn't matter. Her words were empty. None of them could justify what she had done. "Mark, I knew we weren't the same anymore. You lost your job and I didn't know how to handle it. I felt backed into a corner. I didn't know how to support you, and I did something stupid." Her voice trailed off with each phrase, as if she didn't believe what she was saying. My heart clenched with pain. My work, my efforts, everything I had done for us suddenly seemed useless. I gave her everything I could, and she responded with betrayal. It was like a knife in the back. "You knew I was going through a hard time," I said, laughing bitterly. "You knew how hard it was for me after I lost my job. But instead of supporting me, you decided to betray me." She cried even harder, but I couldn't listen to her anymore. All her excuses were so pathetic. Something in me finally broke. "I have nothing more to say to you," I said, getting up from the floor. "Our marriage is over. Mark, please don't do this. We can fix this." She came closer, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "No, Emily. You can't fix this.